The sun had already stolen every drop of moisture from her lips when Rebecca Ramsey's knees buckled, and she pitched forward onto the burning sand. Her last conscious thought a prayer that death would come swiftly in this God-forsaken Nevada desert. Quincy Yates had been tracking a wounded deer for the better part of the morning when he spotted what looked like a dark bundle of fabric crumpled against the pale earth, about half a mile northeast of his position. He reined in his bay mare and squinted against the merciless glare of the August sun, his hand automatically moving to shield his eyes. The deer trail he had been following suddenly seemed far less important than investigating whatever or whoever lay motionless in that expanse of sage and sand. He urged his horse forward, a knot of dread tightening in his stomach as the bundle began to take on a decidedly human shape. When he reached the fallen figure, Quincy dismounted in one fluid motion and dropped to his knees beside what he could now clearly see was a woman. Her dark hair had come loose from whatever pins had once held it and spread across the sand like spilled ink. Her face, though badly sunburned, still held the remnants of beauty beneath the damage. Her lips were cracked and bleeding, and when he pressed his fingers to her throat, searching for a pulse, her skin felt like it had been laid against a stove. But there it was, faint and thready beneath his calloused fingertips, a heartbeat fighting to continue. "Madam, can you hear me?" His voice sounded too loud in the vast silence of the desert. There was no response, not even a flutter of her eyelids. He grabbed his canteen and carefully dribbled a few drops of water across her parched lips, watching as her throat worked instinctively to swallow. That was good. That meant something inside her still wanted to live. Quincy stood and surveyed the surrounding landscape with the practiced eye of a man who had spent his 32 years learning to read the desert. There were no wagon tracks, no horse droppings, nothing to indicate how this woman had ended up alone and dying under the Nevada sun. The nearest town, Rhyolite, lay 12 miles to the southwest, a boomtown that had sprung up practically overnight when gold was discovered in the Bullfrog Hills. His own ranch sat roughly 10 miles due west, a hard-won stretch of land where he raised cattle and horses and fought every single day to coax life from the unforgiving earth. 10 miles. He looked down at the unconscious woman and then at his horse. The mare was sturdy and reliable, but carrying double across that distance in this heat would be asking a lot. Still, what choice did he have? Leaving her here meant certain death, and riding to Rhyolite to fetch help would take too long. She would not survive another hour in the direct sun, let alone the time it would take to make a round trip. "All right, then," he said to no one in particular, and bent to gather the woman into his arms. She weighed less than he expected, her body slight beneath the layers of dusty fabric. Her head lolled against his shoulder as he stood, and he caught the faintest scent of lavender beneath the smell of sweat and sun-baked earth. It struck him as unbearably sad, that little hint of feminine care in the midst of such desperate circumstances. Getting her onto the horse proved awkward but not impossible. He managed to climb into the saddle with her cradled against his chest, then arranged her as comfortably as he could, her head resting in the crook of his arm. She remained completely limp, utterly insensible to being moved. That worried him more than he wanted to admit. "Easy, girl," he murmured to his mare as he turned her westward. "We have got a long walk ahead of us, and I need you steady." The horse seemed to understand the gravity of the situation and moved forward at a careful walk. Quincy kept the unconscious woman shielded as much as possible from the direct sunlight, though there was only so much he could do. Every 15 minutes or so, he stopped to dribble more water between her lips, never giving her too much at once for fear it would make her choke. The sun climbed higher, turning the air into something visible and shimmering. Sweat ran down his back and soaked through his shirt. His mare's sides grew dark with exertion, and he found himself murmuring constant reassurances to both horse and woman, a steady stream of words that helped mark the passing of time. 2 miles passed. Then 3. The woman stirred once, a small moan escaping her throat, and Quincy felt a surge of hope. "That is it," he said softly. "You hang on now, we are going to get you somewhere safe." But she did not wake, just settled back into that worrying stillness. 4 miles. 5. The landscape barely changed, just endless stretches of creosote bush and brittle bush, the occasional Joshua tree standing like a sentinel against the white-blue sky. His arms ached from holding the woman steady, and his throat felt lined with sand despite the swallows of water he allowed himself. He gave the woman more of the precious liquid, watched her swallow reflexively, and permitted himself to believe she might actually survive this. At the 6-mile mark, disaster nearly struck when a rattlesnake, disturbed by the mare's hooves, buzzed its terrible warning. The horse shied violently to the left, and Quincy had to grip with his knees while simultaneously keeping the woman from tumbling out of his arms. "Whoa, whoa now!" His voice came out sharp and commanding, and the mare, well trained despite her fear, managed to settle after a few more nervous steps. The snake slithered away into the rocks, and Quincy took a moment to catch his breath and check that his passenger had not been jostled too badly. A new bruise was already forming on her temple where her head had knocked against his collarbone, but she remained mercifully unconscious. 7 miles. 8. The sun reached its apex and began its slow descent toward the western horizon, though it brought no real relief from the heat. Quincy's canteen grew lighter with each stop. He found himself rationing more carefully, knowing that if they did not reach the ranch soon, they would all 3 be in serious trouble. His ranch hands would be out working the north pasture today, too far away to be of any help. Everything depended on his mare's strength, and his own ability to navigate by landmarks that all started to look the same after hours in the saddle. At 9 miles, he finally spotted the distinctive shape of Devil's Thumb, a rock formation that marked the eastern boundary of his property. Relief flooded through him so intensely that he felt momentarily dizzy. "Almost there," he told the woman, though he no longer expected a response. "Just 1 more mile, you can make it 1 more mile." His ranch house came into view like a mirage, the whitewashed adobe walls seeming to shimmer in the heat. The small barn stood beside it, and beyond that, the corral where his remaining horses would be taking shelter from the worst of the afternoon sun. He had built it all himself over the past 5 years, every fence post and roof beam a testament to stubbornness and determination. It was not much, but it was home, and more importantly right now, it had shade and water and a bed where this dying woman might have a fighting chance. The mare, sensing the journey's end, picked up her pace slightly. Quincy let her, though he kept a careful hold on his burden. They crossed the last 1/4 mile in what felt like both seconds and hours, and then they were there, in the blessed shadow of the barn. He dismounted with extreme care, the woman still unconscious in his arms, and carried her directly into the house. His bedroom was the coolest room, situated on the north side with a window that caught the afternoon breeze when there was one. He laid her on his bed, on top of the patchwork quilt his mother had made before she died, and immediately set about trying to bring down her body temperature. He filled a basin with water from the pump in the kitchen, grabbed every clean cloth he could find, and returned to begin the delicate work of cooling her down without sending her body into shock. He dampened a cloth and pressed it gently to her forehead, her cheeks, her throat. Her skin still radiated heat like a coal. He dampened another cloth and laid it across the back of her neck. Her dress was filthy and probably doing more harm than good, trapping heat against her body, but he could not bring himself to remove it. Instead, he opened the high collar and rolled back her sleeves, giving himself access to her wrists and the inside of her elbows where the blood ran close to the surface. "Come on," he whispered, replacing the cloths with fresh, cool ones as they warmed against her skin. "You did not survive that desert just to die in my bed. Come on." An hour passed. Then two. The sun moved across the sky and sent golden light slanting through the window. Quincy never left her side, just kept up his steady rotation of cool cloths, kept dribbling water into her mouth, kept watching for any sign that she might wake. Her breathing remained shallow but steady. Her pulse, when he checked it, seemed fractionally stronger than it had been in the desert, though that might have been wishful thinking on his part. As the light began to fade toward evening, her eyelids finally fluttered. Quincy, who had been in the process of wringing out another cloth, froze and watched her face intently. Her brow furrowed as if she were trying to solve some difficult problem, and then, slowly, her eyes opened. They were gray, the color of storm clouds, and completely unfocused. She stared at the ceiling for a long moment, then her gaze drifted sideways until it found his face. He saw confusion there, and fear, and the desperate disorientation of someone who had no idea where they were or how they had gotten there. "You are safe," he said immediately, keeping his voice low and calm. "You are at my ranch. I found you in the desert. You have been unconscious for several hours." She tried to speak, but all that emerged was a harsh croak. He quickly poured water into a tin cup and helped her raise her head enough to take a few careful sips. She coughed, grimaced, then managed a few more swallows before sinking back against the pillow. "Slowly," he cautioned. "Your body has been through hell. Too much too fast will just make you sick." She nodded weakly, the movement clearly costing her. When she spoke again, her voice was barely audible, rough as sandpaper. "How far? How far did I carry you?" He understood the question immediately. "About 10 miles, maybe a little more." Her eyes widened slightly, and he saw her trying to process that information. "My father," she whispered. "My father and brother, the wagon." "There was no wagon near where I found you," Quincy said gently. "Just you alone. What happened?" Tears began to slip down her temples, cutting clean tracks through the dust and salt on her skin. "We were traveling to Rhyolite. My father heard there was work there, good work in the mines. We left California 3 weeks ago." She stopped, breathing hard from the effort of speaking. "Water ran low. We tried to ration, but the heat. My mother died first, 5 days ago. We buried her as best we could." Quincy felt his chest tighten. "I am sorry. My brother got sick, fever, started talking out of his head than my father." She closed her eyes and more tears fell. "This morning I woke up and they were both dead, just dead in the wagon. I did not know what to do. I thought maybe I could walk. I thought maybe Rhyolite was closer than it was. I just started walking. I do not remember anything after that." "Which direction were you coming from?" "Northeast." "We were following a route someone told us about in Tonopah." Quincy nodded slowly, his mind already working through the geography. If they had been coming from the northeast, the wagon might be 15 or 20 miles from here, maybe more if she had wandered before collapsing. In this heat, those bodies would need to be dealt with quickly, and the woman would want to see them buried properly. But that would have to wait until she was stronger. "What is your name?" he asked. "Rebecca Ramsey." She opened her eyes again and looked at him with something that might have been curiosity if she had possessed the strength for it. "Who are you?" "Quincy Yates. This is my ranch. Small operation, just cattle and horses mostly. I run it with 3 hands who live in the bunkhouse." He gestured vaguely in the direction of the small structure beyond the barn. "They will be back at dark. For now, you need to rest and drink water. Tomorrow, if you are strong enough, we can talk about finding your family's wagon." "They are dead," she said flatly. "I know. But they still deserve a proper burial, and you deserve to say goodbye. When you are ready." She studied his face for a long moment, and he wondered what she saw there. He was not a handsome man by anyone's standards. His face was too weathered, his features too rough, his nose broken badly enough years ago that it had never set quite straight. But he was honest, and he hoped she could see that much at least. "Thank you," she finally whispered, "for carrying me, for saving my life." Anyone would have done the same. No. Her voice was firm despite its weakness. Not anyone. Most would have ridden on by, told themselves I was already dead to ease their conscience. You did not do that, thank you. He did not know what to say to that, so he just nodded and stood to refresh the water basin. "You should sleep now. Your body needs to heal." "I am in your bed," she said, the realization seeming to strike her suddenly. "Where will you sleep?" "I have a chair that is comfortable enough." "Do not worry about me." But she was already sliding toward sleep again, her brief period of wakefulness having exhausted her remaining reserves. Quincy watched her breathing even out and deepen, then carried the basin back to the kitchen and set about making himself something to eat. He was ravenous, he realized, having not eaten since breakfast. The ride back with Rebecca had consumed the entire day. His hands, Samuel, Marcus, and old Tom, returned just after sunset, horses tired and the men even more so. Quincy met them at the barn and quickly explained the situation. Samuel, the youngest at 24, looked shocked. Marcus, 30 and married to a woman who lived in Rhyolite, looked sympathetic. Tom, who claimed to be 60 but was probably closer to 70, just nodded as if he had seen it all before and nothing surprised him anymore. "She going to make it?" Tom asked, already beginning to unsaddle his horse. "I think so. She woke up for a bit earlier, talked some. She is strong or she would not have survived this long." "What are you going to do with her?" Marcus wanted to know. "She got family waiting somewhere. Her family is dead. Parents and brother all died on the trail. She is alone." The three men absorbed this information in silence. Finally, Samuel said, "That is hard, real hard. Poor girl. Tomorrow, if she can tell me where to look, I will need one of you to ride out with me to find the wagon. The bodies need burying." Quincy looked at Tom. "Can you stay here? Keep an eye on her." "Course I can. Not much use for long rides anymore anyway." They finished tending the horses, and Quincy left his men to their supper in the bunkhouse while he returned to the main house. Rebecca was still sleeping, her breathing easier than it had been. He settled into the chair beside the bed, tipped his hat over his eyes, and let exhaustion drag him under. He woke periodically through the night to check on her, to give her water when she roused enough to drink. By morning, the worst of the crisis seemed to have passed. Her skin, though still sunburned and tender, no longer felt like it was burning from the inside out. Her pulse was stronger, steadier. When dawn light began to creep through the window, he stepped outside to splash water on his face from the pump, and found the world transformed by the cooler morning air into something almost bearable. Tom was already up, sitting on the porch of the bunkhouse with a cup of coffee. Quincy walked over and accepted the cup the old man poured for him from the battered pot. "She make it through the night?" Tom asked. "She did. Fever broke, I think. She is going to be laid up for a while, but I believe she will pull through." "Then what?" It was a fair question, and one Quincy had been turning over in his mind during his brief periods of wakefulness. "I do not know. That is up to her, I suppose. She has no family, no money that I know of. Rhyolite might have worked for a woman, but it is a rough town." Tom made a non-committal sound and sipped his coffee. "Might be you could use someone around here who can cook and mend. Place could use a woman's touch. I am not looking for a wife, if that is what you are implying." Did not say you were. Just saying there are practical considerations is all. Think about it. Tom drained his cup and stood with a grunt. I will start breakfast. You go check on your patient. Rebecca was awake when Quincy returned to the house, propped up slightly on the pillows and looking around the room with apparent fascination. She turned her head when she heard his footsteps, and he was struck by how different she looked in the morning light. The worst of the sunburn had begun to peel, revealing new pink skin beneath, and though she was still obviously weak, there was a clarity to her eyes that had been missing the day before. "Good morning," he said. "How are you feeling?" "Like I was dragged behind a horse for 10 miles instead of carried on one." She attempted a smile, but it turned into a wince when the motion pulled at her cracked lips. "But alive. Better than I expected when I collapsed yesterday." 2 days ago, he corrected gently. "You slept through most of yesterday and all of last night." She blinked in surprise. 2 days. Your body needed the rest. Are you hungry?" As if in response, her stomach growled audibly, and this time her smile was more successful. "Starving, actually. Tom is making breakfast. I will bring you a plate. But first, I need to ask you some questions about where I might find your family's wagon." The light in her eyes dimmed immediately, but she nodded. "Of course. I will tell you everything I can remember." She described the terrain as best she could. Certain landmarks she thought she remembered, the direction they had been traveling. Quincy listened carefully and pieced together a mental map of where the wagon might be. It would still take some searching, but her information narrowed the area considerably. "Marcus and I will ride out after breakfast," he said. "We will find them and see to it they are buried properly. Is there anything specific you want done? Any prayers or words you want said?" She was quiet for a long moment, her gaze fixed on her hands where they rested on top of the quilt. "My mother loved the 23rd Psalm. My father was not much for religion, but he always said he hoped to rest where he could see the mountains. My brother was only 14. He wanted to be a prospector, find gold, make us all rich." Her voice broke slightly. "He was a good boy. They were good people. They just wanted a better life." "I will see to it they are buried with respect," Quincy promised, "and when you are strong enough, I will take you to visit the graves." "Thank you." She looked up at him, and the gratitude in her eyes was almost painful to see. "I do not know how I will ever repay you for your kindness." "There is nothing to repay. You needed help and I was there to give it. That is all." Tom's breakfast turned out to be bacon, eggs, and biscuits that were only slightly burned. Quincy brought Rebecca a plate with small portions of everything, knowing her stomach would not be able to handle much after days of near starvation. She ate slowly, carefully, and managed to keep everything down. He considered that a victory. An hour later, he and Marcus rode out, armed with shovels and Rebecca's descriptions. The sun was already fierce, but they pushed on, eyes scanning the horizon for any sign of a wagon. It took them most of the morning, but they finally spotted it, a dark shape in a shallow ravine about 18 miles northeast of the ranch. 3 bodies lay in and around the wagon, just as Rebecca had described. The work was grim and physically demanding. They chose a spot on higher ground where the mountains were visible in the distance and dug 3 graves in the hard earth. It took hours under the burning sun, and by the time they lowered the canvas-wrapped bodies into the ground, Quincy felt hollowed out by the sadness of it all. A family destroyed by the desert's indifference, leaving only one young woman alive to mourn them. Marcus, who knew more scripture than Quincy, recited the 23rd Psalm over the mother's grave. They marked all 3 graves with stones and rough wooden crosses made from pieces of the wagon. Quincy found himself saying a private prayer for the 14-year-old boy who had only wanted to find gold and give his family a better life. They searched the wagon for anything worth salvaging. Most of the family's possessions were ruined by the heat or not worth the effort of hauling back. But Quincy found a small trunk that contained what appeared to be Rebecca's things. Clothes, mostly, and a few personal items including a daguerreotype of a younger Rebecca with a woman who must have been her mother. He tied the trunk to his saddle, and they began the long ride back to the ranch. It was nearly dark when they returned. Quincy carried the trunk into the house and found Rebecca sitting in a chair by the window, wrapped in a blanket despite the lingering heat. Tom had clearly helped her out of bed, though she still looked weak as a newborn kitten. "We found them," Quincy said quietly. "They are buried on high ground with a view of the mountains." Marcus said the proper words. Rebecca closed her eyes and nodded, tears slipping down her cheeks. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you for giving them that dignity." He set the trunk down beside her chair. "I brought your things. I hope you do not mind. Most of what was in the wagon was not salvageable, but this looked important." She opened the trunk with trembling hands and sorted through its contents, pulling out the daguerreotype and holding it against her heart. "This was from 5 years ago, before we left St. Louis. Before everything fell apart. We were happy then." Quincy did not know what to say, so he just rested his hand briefly on her shoulder in a gesture of comfort. She reached up and covered his hand with her own, and they stayed like that for a long moment. Two people bound together by tragedy and circumstance. The days that followed fell into a rhythm. Rebecca's strength returned gradually. First, she could sit in the chair for a few hours without exhaustion. Then she could walk from the bedroom to the kitchen without needing to rest. By the end of the first week, she was insisting on helping with small tasks, despite Quincy's protests that she should continue resting. She mended a pile of shirts that had been languishing in a basket for months. She organized his chaotic kitchen. She even managed to make a passable stew for dinner one evening, much to the delight of Tom, Marcus, and Samuel, who were accustomed to their own mediocre cooking. Quincy found himself watching her more than he should, noticing small things. The way she hummed tunelessly while she worked. The way she braided her dark hair each morning and pinned it up in a coronet around her head. The way her face lit up when she stepped outside in the evening and felt the cooler air on her skin. She was 26 years old, she had told him, 3 years younger than himself. She had worked as a seamstress in California before her father decided to try his luck in the Nevada goldfields. She was smart and capable and surprisingly funny when she forgot to be sad. He was falling for her. He recognized the signs even as he tried to deny them. The way his pulse quickened when he heard her voice. The way he found excuses to be in the house more often. The way he lay awake at night, increasingly uncomfortable in the chair while she slept in his bed, and thought about what it might be like to court her properly. To build something real with her beyond the strange circumstances that had brought them together. But it seemed impossibly presumptuous to think she might feel the same way. She was there out of necessity, not choice. She had nowhere else to go, no money, no resources. Any affection she showed him might simply be gratitude, and he would not take advantage of her vulnerability. So he kept his feelings to himself, and treated her with respectful distance, even as it became increasingly difficult to ignore the way his heart insisted on beating faster whenever she smiled at him. Rebecca, for her part, was navigating her own complicated feelings. She owed Quincy Yates her life, a debt so enormous she could not begin to imagine how to repay it. But beyond gratitude, she found herself genuinely liking the quiet cowboy who had carried her 10 miles through the desert. He was kind without being soft, strong without being domineering. He treated her like a person, not a burden or a charity case. His hands were always busy with work, but he never seemed too busy to answer her questions or teach her something new about ranch life. She caught herself watching him sometimes. The way he moved, economical and purposeful. The way he spoke to his horses, gentle and respectful. The way the evening light turned his profile into something almost handsome despite the weathering and the broken nose. She thought about the fact that he had given up his bed for her without a second thought, and had spent 2 weeks sleeping in an uncomfortable chair without complaint. She thought about how safe she felt here, in this small adobe house in the middle of nowhere, with this man who asked nothing of her except that she heal. It was dangerous, these feelings. She was in no position to be developing romantic notions about anyone, least of all the man who had saved her life. She had nothing to offer him, no dowry, no family connections, just herself and the clothes in her trunk. What could a successful rancher possibly want with a penniless seamstress? 2 weeks after Quincy had found her in the desert, Rebecca declared herself well enough to visit her family's graves. He tried to dissuade her, worried it was too soon, but she was adamant. She needed to say goodbye properly, she told him, and she needed to do it before any more time passed. They rode out together in the early morning when the air was coolest. Quincy kept his horse at a walk, mindful of the fact that Rebecca had not been on horseback since before her family died. She sat in front of him in the saddle, and he tried not to think about how right it felt to have her there, warm and alive in his arms. The graves looked lonely under the vast sky, 3 mounds of earth marked with their rough crosses. Rebecca dismounted carefully and stood before them for a long time, silent and still. Quincy hung back, giving her privacy, but he was close enough to hear when she finally began to speak. "I am sorry," she said, her voice barely audible over the desert wind. "I am sorry I could not save you. I am sorry you did not make it to Rhyolite, that you did not get your fresh start. Mama, I hope you are at peace. Daddy, I hope you found the rest you were looking for. Thomas, I hope heaven has more gold than you ever dreamed of." She knelt in the dust and placed her hand on each grave in turn. "I will miss you every day. I will carry you with me always. Goodbye." She stayed on her knees for a few minutes more, her shoulders shaking with silent sobs. Quincy ached to go to her, to offer comfort, but some instinct told him she needed this moment alone with her grief. Finally, she stood, wiped her eyes, and turned back toward him. "I am ready," she said. The ride back to the ranch was quiet. Rebecca leaned against Quincy's chest, exhausted by emotion, and he let one arm circle her waist to keep her steady. It was the closest they had been since that first day when he had carried her unconscious across the desert, and the intimacy of it made his throat tight. "What will you do?" he asked as the ranch came into view. "I mean, you are welcome to stay as long as you need. I do not want you to feel rushed. But I imagine you have been thinking about your future." Rebecca was quiet for so long he thought she might not answer. Then she said, "I have been thinking about it constantly. I have no money for a stagecoach ticket, even if I had somewhere to go. I have no family left. I suppose I could try to find work in Rhyolite, but the idea of going there alone to a town full of miners and prospectors." She trailed off, leaving the rest unsaid. "You could stay here," Quincy said before he could talk himself out of it. "The ranch could use someone to manage the house. The men and I are not exactly skilled at cooking and cleaning. It would be a fair arrangement. You would have room and board, a small wage, and you would be safe. No expectations beyond honest work." He felt her tense slightly in his arms. "You are offering me employment." "Yes, if you want it. If you would rather go to Rhyolite and take your chances there, I will give you the money for a decent start, but the offer stands if you want to stay." She turned her head to look up at him, her gray eyes searching his face. "Why are you being so kind to me?" "Because I can be. Because it is the right thing to do, because—" He stopped, unsure how much to reveal. "Because what?" "Because I would like you to stay," he admitted. I've gotten used to having you around. The house feels different with you in it. Better. But the choice is yours, Rebecca. I will not hold it against you, whatever you decide." She faced forward again, and he could not read her expression. They rode the last mile in silence, and when they reached the barn, she slid down from the horse before he could help her and went straight into the house without a word. Quincy watched her go and cursed himself for saying too much, for making her uncomfortable, for ruining the fragile peace they had built. But that evening, as the men gathered for supper, Rebecca appeared with a large pot of venison stew and a plate of cornbread that had actually risen properly. She served everyone with a quiet efficiency, and when she sat down at the table with them, she looked at Quincy directly and said, "I accept your offer. I will stay and keep house for you if you will have me." Relief flooded through him so powerfully he almost laughed. "I am glad," he said, keeping his voice steady with effort. "I think it will work out well for everyone." Tom raised his coffee mug in a toast. "To new arrangements," he said with a knowing glint in his eye that made Quincy want to kick him under the table. The following weeks transformed the ranch in ways Quincy had not anticipated. Rebecca threw herself into her work with the same determination that had kept her walking through the desert, even when death seemed certain. The house, which had been merely functional under Quincy's bachelor management, became something close to comfortable. Curtains appeared in the windows. The floors stayed swept. The dishes got washed promptly instead of piling up for days. Meals improved dramatically, with actual vegetables making regular appearances alongside the usual meat and beans. But more than the physical changes, Rebecca's presence altered the atmosphere of the place. The men, who had grown accustomed to a life of hard work punctuated by silence and the occasional bout of drinking, found themselves lingering at the dinner table to hear her stories about St. Louis in California. She had a gift for narrative, painting pictures with words that made distant cities come alive. Samuel developed an obvious boyish crush on her, though he was respectful enough to never act on it. Marcus started bringing his wife Sarah out to the ranch on Sundays, clearly hoping the two women would become friends. Even Tom, crusty and set in his ways, softened around her, teaching her to play chess on the battered board he kept in the bunkhouse. Quincy watched it all happen, and felt his initial attraction deepening into something more substantial and more terrifying. He was not in love with the idea of Rebecca or with his gratitude for her housekeeping skills. He was in love with her, with the real woman who sang off-key while she hung laundry and swore creatively when she burned the biscuits, and sat on the porch in the evening reading aloud from the 3 books he owned, because she said stories were better when shared. He thought she might feel something for him too. He caught her looking at him sometimes with an expression he could not quite decipher. She found excuses to touch his hand or his arm, brief casual contacts that nevertheless sent electricity racing through his veins. She laughed at his jokes, even the bad ones. She asked his opinion on things and actually seemed to care about his answers, but she was his employee now, dependent on him for her livelihood and safety. The power imbalance made any romantic overture feel inappropriate, even dangerous. So he kept his feelings locked down tight and treated her with the same respectful courtesy he had shown since the beginning, even though it was becoming increasingly difficult to be in the same room with her, without wanting to pull her into his arms and kiss her, until neither of them could breathe. Autumn arrived suddenly, as it did in the desert, bringing cooler nights and a slight softening of the daytime heat. The cattle needed to be moved to different grazing areas. Fences needed mending before winter. The hay crop, such as it was in this arid climate, needed to be harvested and stored. Quincy and his men worked from dawn until dark, and Rebecca kept everything running smoothly back at the house. It was during this busy season that trouble found them in the form of a man named Victor Strand. He rode up to the ranch one afternoon leading a string of horses, well-dressed and well-armed, with the kind of confidence that came from always getting what he wanted. Quincy was repairing a section of corral fence when the man arrived, and he set down his hammer and approached with the wariness of someone who had learned that unexpected visitors rarely brought good news. "Help you?" Quincy asked, keeping his tone neutral. "I hope so. Name is Victor Strand. I have a ranch about 20 miles south of here, much larger operation than this." He looked around with poorly concealed disdain. "I am looking to expand my horse breeding program, and I have been told you have some quality stock." "I have a few good horses," Quincy allowed. "Not sure any of them are for sale, though." "Everything is for sale at the right price." Strand's eyes drifted past Quincy toward the house, where Rebecca had just stepped out onto the porch to shake out a rug, his gaze sharpened with interest. "Who is that?" "My housekeeper." "That does not concern you. Pretty woman. Does not seem the type usually found keeping house at a small ranch in the middle of nowhere." Strand swung down from his horse without waiting for an invitation. "Mind if I water my animals? It has been a long, hot ride." Quincy did mind, but refusing would have been a violation of the unspoken code of desert hospitality. "Help yourself. Trough is over there." While Strand tended to his horses, Quincy walked quickly to the porch where Rebecca stood watching with concern. "Who is he?" she asked quietly. "Says his name is Victor Strand. Rich rancher from down south. I do not trust him." Quincy kept his voice low. "If he tries to talk to you, be polite, but do not tell him anything about yourself, and do not let him in the house. You think he is dangerous." "I think he is the kind of man who takes what he wants and does not care who gets hurt in the process. Just be careful." She nodded, clutching the rug against her chest like a shield. Strand finished with his horses and walked over, smiling in a way that made Quincy's fists clench. "You must be the housekeeper," Strand said, directing his full attention to Rebecca. "Victor Strand at your service, and you are busy," Rebecca said shortly. "If you will excuse me, I have work to do." She turned to go back inside, but Strand spoke again. "I was actually hoping to discuss a business proposition with Mr. Yates here, perhaps over dinner. A home-cooked meal would be a pleasant change from my cook's attempts." "I am afraid that is not possible," Quincy said firmly. "As the lady said, she is busy. If you want to discuss buying horses, we can do that now. Otherwise, I have work to get back to." Strand's smile never wavered, but something cold flickered in his eyes. "Of course. Perhaps another time. Let me be direct, Mr. Yates. I have heard you have a 3-year-old bay stallion with excellent lines. I am prepared to offer you $300 for him." $300 was a fortune, more than twice what the horse was worth. Quincy felt suspicion crawl up his spine. "That is very generous." "But he is not for sale." $500 then. "No amount of money will make him for sale. I am building my own breeding program, and he is the foundation of it. I appreciate your interest, but you are wasting your time." Strand's smile finally faded. "That is unfortunate. I make it a policy to acquire what I want, Mr. Yates, one way or another. Think carefully before you refuse me again. I will return in a few days, and perhaps you will have reconsidered." He mounted his horse with the fluid grace of an experienced rider and tipped his hat to Rebecca. "Madam, I do hope we meet again under more pleasant circumstances." Then he was gone, trailing his string of horses behind him in a cloud of dust. Quincy stood watching until he disappeared from view, his gut tight with worry. "That was unsettling," Rebecca said. "Yes, it was. I do not like him, and I especially do not like the way he looked at you. He looked at me the way men often look at women they think might be available for purchase, just like his horses." Her voice was bitter. I am no stranger to that particular expression. Quincy turned to look at her, seeing the steel beneath her gentle exterior. You are not for sale, and neither is my horse. If he comes back, I will make that abundantly clear. Be careful, Quincy. A man like that does not make threats idly. I am always careful. But I will not be bullied on my own land. Strand did return 3 days later, this time with 2 rough-looking men riding beside him. Quincy was ready, having kept the rifle close at hand since the first visit. Tom, Marcus, and Samuel formed up behind him, a show of solidarity that Quincy appreciated even as he hoped it would not come to violence. "Mr. Yates," Strand greeted him with false warmth. "Have you reconsidered my offer?" "I have not, and the answer remains no." "I see. What if I were to sweeten the deal? $800, and I will throw in 2 mares from my own stock. That is more than fair." "I am sure it is. But the horse is not for sale at any price. I have said this twice now. I will not say it a third time." Strand's expression hardened. "You are making a mistake. This is harsh country, Mr. Yates. Accidents happen. Cattle wander off. Buildings catch fire. It would be a shame if any misfortune befell your little operation here." The men behind him shifted meaningfully, hands resting on their gun belts. Quincy felt anger surge hot and sharp in his chest, but he kept his voice level. "If you are threatening me, do it plainly. I do not appreciate coded language. I am simply pointing out that a man with limited resources would be wise to accept generosity when it is offered. These things go smoother when everyone is reasonable. Here is me being reasonable." Quincy raised the rifle slightly, not quite aiming it but making his point clear. "You and your men have 10 seconds to get off my property. If you come back again without an invitation, I will assume you mean harm and I will act accordingly. Am I being plain enough for you?" For a long, tense moment, Strand stared at him, weighing his options. Then he laughed, a sound utterly devoid of humor. "You have spirit, I will grant you that. But spirit does not stop bullets, Mr. Yates. Remember that." He wheeled his horse and rode off, his men following. This time, Quincy kept the rifle up until they were completely out of sight. "That is going to come back on us," Marcus said quietly. "I know. But I will not be extorted, and I will not let him think he can intimidate me into submission. We will just have to be vigilant." They were. For the next week, someone was always on watch, especially at night. Rebecca stopped hanging laundry alone, instead waiting until one of the men could be nearby. The cattle were checked twice daily instead of once. The horses were brought into the corral closest to the house after dark. But despite their caution, disaster struck in a way none of them anticipated. Quincy woke in the early morning to the sound of Samuel shouting. He was out of bed and running before his mind fully caught up, grabbing his rifle on the way. He burst out of the house to find the barn engulfed in flames, fire eating through the dry wood with terrifying speed. The horses inside were screaming, a sound that would haunt him for the rest of his life. "Get the horses," he roared, and they all ran toward the inferno despite the heat that singed eyebrows and stole breath. The door had been barred from the outside, a deliberate act of sabotage that could mean only one thing. Marcus broke the bar with his shoulder, and they plunged into the smoke-filled interior. It was chaos and nightmare. Quincy managed to get 3 horses out, including his beloved bay stallion. Tom got 2 more. Samuel saved one before a beam fell, nearly crushing him. Marcus pulled Samuel clear and they stumbled out, coughing and blackened with soot. But 4 horses remained inside, and the fire was too intense now. They could only stand and watch as the barn collapsed in on itself, the screaming finally, mercifully, stopping. Rebecca appeared with blankets soaked in water, throwing them over the men to smother the embers on their clothes and hair. Her face was streaked with tears. Is everyone all right? Is anyone hurt? We are alive, Quincy said, his voice raw from smoke. He looked at the smoldering ruin of his barn, at the terrified horses milling in the corral, at his men's devastated faces. Rage unlike anything he had ever felt threatened to consume him. This was Strand. This was his answer to being told no. We should get the sheriff, Rebecca said. He cannot be allowed to get away with this. The nearest sheriff is in Goldfield, 2 days' ride from here. By the time we got there and back, Strand could destroy the whole ranch. No. Quincy set his jaw, decision crystallizing. I am going to his ranch, today, and I am going to make him pay for this. Quincy, no. Rebecca grabbed his arm, her grip surprisingly strong. That is exactly what he wants. He is baiting you into doing something rash so he can kill you and claim self-defense. Do not give him that satisfaction. She is right, Tom said quietly. Going in angry is going to get you killed, son. We need to think this through. Quincy wanted to argue, but the fear in Rebecca's eyes stopped him. She was terrified, he realized, not for the ranch but for him. That fear mattered more than his rage. All right, he said finally. We do this smart. Tom, Marcus, you ride to Goldfield and report what happened. File charges if the sheriff will take them. Samuel, you and I will start salvaging what we can and rebuild the corral to hold all the horses securely. Rebecca. He looked at her. Stay in the house. Keep the rifle loaded. If anyone comes around who is not one of us, you shoot first and ask questions later. She nodded, still holding his arm. Promise me you will not do anything stupid while I am not looking. Despite everything, he felt a ghost of a smile touch his lips. I promise to try. The next few days were grueling. Tom and Marcus returned with disappointing news. The sheriff was sympathetic, but had no jurisdiction out here and limited resources even if he did. Without proof that Strand had set the fire, there was nothing he could do. It was a frustrating but not unexpected answer. They rebuilt. The barn could not be replaced quickly, but they constructed a sturdy shelter for the horses and reinforced the existing corrals. They took turns on watch, rifles always close at hand. The tension was exhausting, everyone waiting for the next attack, but days passed and nothing happened. Strand had made his point and apparently felt no need to push further, but the fire had changed something between Quincy and Rebecca. The fear she had shown for his safety had cracked open the careful distance they had both been maintaining. She stayed closer to him now, finding excuses to be wherever he was working. He caught himself watching her constantly, reassuring himself she was safe. At night, he found it increasingly difficult to sleep in the chair knowing she was just a few feet away in his bed. It came to a head 2 weeks after the fire. Quincy was repairing tack in the kitchen while Rebecca made bread, her hands moving in the familiar rhythm of kneading. The domesticity of the scene struck him with unexpected force. This was what life could be, he thought. This quiet companionship, this comfortable sharing of space, this sense of partnership. Not just an employer and employee, but something more, something real. Rebecca, he said, setting down the bridle he had been oiling. I need to talk to you about something. She looked up, flour dusting her cheeks. That sounds serious. It is. Maybe, I do not know. He stood and crossed to the wash basin, needing to do something with his hands. When Strand set that fire, when I thought the whole ranch might burn and you might be in danger, I realized something. I realized that you are the most important thing here. Not the land, not the horses, not the cattle. You. And I have been lying to myself for weeks trying to pretend my feelings are anything other than what they are. He heard her breath catch, but did not turn around, afraid that seeing her face would make him lose his nerve. I am in love with you, Rebecca. I think I started falling that first day in the desert, and I have not stopped since. I know the situation is complicated. You work for me, and there is a power imbalance there. You have been through hell and might not be ready for this. I do not want to make you uncomfortable or pressure you into something you do not want. But I had to tell you the truth because I am tired of pretending, and life is too short and too uncertain to waste time on cowardice. The silence stretched long enough that he finally forced himself to turn around. Rebecca stood frozen by the table, her hands still covered in flour, tears streaming down her face. "Did I upset you?" he asked, alarmed. "I am sorry, I should not have said anything. Please forget I mentioned it." "No," she said fiercely. "No, do not you dare take it back. Quincy Yates, you are the most frustrating man I have ever met. I have been in love with you for weeks, and I thought I was going to die of it because you were always so respectful and distant and proper. Do you have any idea how many times I wanted to just grab you and kiss you and see if that got through your thick skull?" He stared at her, hope and disbelief warring in his chest. "You love me. Of course I love you. You carried me 10 miles through the desert. You gave me your bed and slept in a chair for weeks. You buried my family with honor. You gave me work and safety and treated me like I mattered. How could I not love you?" She wiped at her tears with the back of one flour-covered hand, leaving white streaks across her face. "I thought you only saw me as some sort of responsibility or good deed. I never imagined you might actually want me." He crossed the room in 3 strides and cupped her face in his hands, mindful of the flour but not caring. "Rebecca Ramsey, I want you more than I have ever wanted anything in my life. May I kiss you? If you do not, I am going to be very disappointed after that speech," she said. And then his lips were on hers and the world narrowed to just the two of them. The taste of her, the feel of her hands clutching his shirt, the small sound of happiness she made against his mouth. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, he rested his forehead against hers and laughed softly. "I have been such a fool. We both have been. But we are done being foolish now, agreed, agreed." He kissed her again, softer this time, savoring it. "I should probably ask you properly. Rebecca, would you do me the honor of allowing me to court you? With the intention of marriage, if that is something you might want down the line." "Down the line?" She pulled back to look at him incredulously. "Quincy, I am already living in your house and in love with you. How much more courted do I need to be? If you are asking whether I will marry you, the answer is yes. Yes, right now, yes today if we can find someone to perform the ceremony. You want to marry me today?" He was laughing now, giddy with relief and joy. "Just like that, just like that. I have already lost too much time with people I love. I am not wasting another moment. So yes, today, tomorrow, next week, whatever is soonest. If you will have me." "If I will have you," he echoed wonderingly. "Rebecca, you are the best thing that ever happened to me, and I found you dying in the desert. If that is not some kind of miracle, I do not know what is. Yes, I will marry you. Today, tomorrow, whenever you want. But first I need to kiss you again, because I have been dreaming about this for so long, and I still cannot quite believe it is real." So he kissed her again, and it was Tom who found them some time later, still wrapped in each other's arms in the kitchen with the bread dough forgotten on the table. The old man took one look at them and smiled. "About damn time," he said. "I was beginning to think I would die before you two figured it out." They rode into Rhyolite the next day, all 5 of them making the trip together. The town was as rough as Rebecca had feared, a chaotic sprawl of tents and hastily constructed buildings housing the thousands who had flocked to the goldfields. But it also had what they needed: a minister willing to perform a marriage ceremony and a general store where Rebecca could buy a simple but pretty dress that was not covered in flour or mended in a dozen places. The ceremony was short and sweet, held in the minister's small church with Tom, Marcus, Samuel, and Sarah as witnesses. Rebecca wore wildflowers in her hair that Sarah had helped her gather that morning. Quincy wore his cleanest shirt and looked at his bride like she was made of starlight. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Quincy kissed Rebecca with such tenderness that Sarah started crying, and Marcus had to lend her his handkerchief. They celebrated with dinner at the town's best restaurant, which was not saying much but felt incredibly fancy after months of eating at the ranch. Samuel got a little drunk on whiskey and made a rambling toast about true love and second chances. Tom was more concise. To the Yates family, may they have many happy years together. That night, back at the ranch, Quincy carried Rebecca over the threshold of their home even though she protested she could walk perfectly well. "Indulge me," he said. "I have been wanting to do this since the day I carried you out of the desert." He set her down gently inside the bedroom, their bedroom now, and suddenly they were both nervous. This was different from the passionate kisses in the kitchen, weighted with significance and permanence. "I have never," Rebecca started, then stopped, blushing. "Neither have I," Quincy admitted. "I suppose we will figure it out together." And they did, tenderly and with much laughter and a few awkward moments that somehow made it more real. Afterward, lying tangled together in the bed they would share for the rest of their lives, Rebecca traced the scar on his shoulder where he had been thrown from a horse as a young man. "Tell me everything," she said. "Tell me every story. I want to know all of you." So he did, talking through the night about his childhood in Texas, his parents who died when he was 19, his journey to Nevada, and the 5 hard years building the ranch from nothing. She told him about growing up in St. Louis, the bustling city so different from the empty desert. She told him about learning to sew from her mother, about the business that had failed in California, about the desperation that had driven her family to risk everything on the journey to Rhyolite. "You ever wish you could go back?" he asked. "To cities and civilization and a life that does not involve fighting the desert every single day." She was quiet for a moment, considering. "A year ago, I would have said yes without hesitation. But now, this feels like home, Quincy. You feel like home. I would not trade this for anything." He pulled her closer and pressed a kiss to her forehead. "Good, because I am never letting you go." The following months brought changes, some subtle and some profound. Winter arrived, turning the desert surprisingly cold. They spent evenings in front of the fireplace, Quincy teaching Rebecca to play chess while she taught him to dance, though there was little space in the small house for anything elaborate. The ranch work continued, relentless but satisfying. The horses Quincy had saved from the fire became the foundation of his breeding program. Marcus's wife, Sarah, became Rebecca's close friend, the two women trading visits and recipes and gossip. Samuel finally found a sweetheart in Rhyolite, a miner's daughter with red hair and a sharp wit. Tom, ever the watcher, smiled at all of it and said little but seemed pleased. There was no further trouble from Victor Strand. Word filtered through that he had sold his ranch and moved to California, apparently deciding that Nevada was not profitable enough for his ambitions. Quincy did not mourn his departure. In April, Rebecca realized she was pregnant. She told Quincy one evening at dinner, simply and without preamble, "I am going to have a baby." He dropped his fork. "You are certain?" "Certain as I can be. I am about 3 months along, I think. Are you pleased?" He came around the table and pulled her into his arms, holding her like she was made of glass. "Pleased does not begin to cover it. I am terrified and amazed and so happy I cannot find words. Are you all right? Do you need anything? Should you be resting more?" She laughed and kissed him. "I am fine, Quincy. Women have been having babies since the beginning of time. I am strong and I have you. We will be fine." But as her pregnancy progressed through the brutal heat of summer, Quincy could not quite shake his worry. The memories of her collapsed in the desert, near death from the sun, haunted him. He became overprotective, constantly hovering, until Rebecca finally sat him down and told him firmly that she appreciated his concern, but she was not an invalid, and if he did not stop treating her like she might break, she was going to hit him with a frying pan. Their son was born on a cold November night, arriving quickly and with surprisingly little trouble. According to the midwife, Sarah had brought from Rhyolite. Quincy paced outside the bedroom door until Sarah finally opened it and told him to stop wearing a hole in the floor and come meet his child. He entered to find Rebecca propped up in bed, exhausted but radiant, holding a tiny bundle. "Quincy," she said softly, "meet your son." The baby was impossibly small, with a shock of dark hair and his mother's gray eyes. Quincy sat carefully on the edge of the bed and reached out with one trembling hand to touch the baby's cheek. "He is perfect," he whispered. "He is absolutely perfect. What should we name him?" "I was thinking Thomas," Rebecca said, "after my brother and after Tom. Both good men, both worth honoring." "Thomas Yates." Quincy tested the name and smiled. "Yes, that is exactly right." Tom, when informed he had a namesake, got suspiciously misty-eyed and claimed it was just dust in the air. Samuel gave the baby a silver dollar to start his fortune. Marcus and Sarah brought gifts of baby clothes Sarah had sewn herself. The small house filled with friends and chosen family, celebrating new life in the middle of the harsh desert. That winter was one of the happiest of Quincy's life. He would wake in the pre-dawn darkness to the sound of the baby fussing and find Rebecca already up, nursing Thomas in the rocking chair Quincy had built during her pregnancy. He would join them, wrapping a blanket around Rebecca's shoulders against the cold, and they would sit together in the quiet, just the three of them, watching the sun come up over the mountains. Thomas grew strong and healthy, a loud baby who seemed to have inherited his mother's stubbornness and his father's steady disposition. By his first birthday, he was walking and getting into everything. Quincy had to build gates to keep him out of dangerous areas, and Rebecca developed eyes in the back of her head to track his constant motion. "We are going to need more space," Rebecca said one evening, watching Thomas toddle around the small house. "He needs room to grow, and I hope he will not be an only child forever." "You want more children?" Quincy asked, pulling her close. "At least one or two more, if you agree." "I agree, and you are right about the space. I have been thinking about expanding the house, adding on a few rooms. It would take time and money, but we have been doing well with the horses. I think we can afford it." So the expansion began, a slow process of building whenever they could spare the time and resources. By the time Thomas was 2, the house had doubled in size, with separate bedrooms for children and a larger kitchen where Rebecca could work comfortably. The ranch itself grew too: more cattle, more horses, more land. What had been a struggling operation when Quincy found Rebecca in the desert had become something solid and profitable, a real home. Their daughter was born when Thomas was 3, a tiny thing with her father's dark eyes and a surprisingly powerful set of lungs. They named her Elizabeth, after Rebecca's mother. Thomas was fascinated by his baby sister, constantly wanting to help to hold her, to show her his toys. He took his role as big brother seriously, and Rebecca and Quincy often found him sitting beside her cradle, telling her long, rambling stories that made no sense but seemed to soothe her nonetheless. The years rolled on, marked by the rhythms of ranch life and the growth of their children. Thomas learned to ride before he was 5, fearless on a gentle mare Quincy had trained specifically for him. Elizabeth was slower to take to horses, but showed an early talent for numbers, helping her mother with the household accounts before she could barely read. A third child, Another boy they named Michael arrived when Elizabeth was 4. He was quiet and thoughtful, content to spend hours watching the world around him, absorbing everything. Quincy built a school room onto the house and hired a teacher from Rhyolite to come twice a week, teaching not just his own children but those of his ranch hands and neighboring families. Education mattered, he told Rebecca, especially out here where ignorance could mean the difference between success and failure. Tom passed away in his sleep one winter night when Thomas was 10, surrounded by the family he had chosen if not been born into. They buried him on a hill overlooking the ranch with full honors, and Quincy made sure his headstone was the finest marble he could order from back east. Samuel, now married with 2 children of his own, took over as foreman. Marcus and Sarah eventually bought a small ranch of their own but remained close friends and frequent visitors. Rebecca's hair started to show silver when she was 40, and Quincy thought it made her more beautiful than ever. His own body showed the wear of hard years of work, joints that ached on cold mornings, scars from various injuries collected over time. But they were healthy and happy, and surrounded by the life they had built together. On the 20th anniversary of the day Quincy had found Rebecca in the desert, they rode out together to visit her family's graves. The wooden crosses had long since been replaced with proper headstones that Quincy had commissioned years ago. Rebecca placed wildflowers on each grave as she did every year and stood for a moment in silence. "I wish they could have known you," she finally said, linking her arm through Quincy's. "I wish they could have seen what you gave me, what we built together." "I wish I could have known them," Quincy replied. "But in a way they gave me the greatest gift imaginable. If they had not set out on that journey, if you had not survived, if I had not been tracking that deer that particular morning, none of this would have happened. Every good thing in my life came from finding you that day." "My hero," Rebecca said with a smile that still made his heart race after all these years. "My cowboy who carried me 10 miles through the desert." "Best 10 miles I ever traveled," he said, and kissed her there among the graves under the endless Nevada sky. They rode back to the ranch as the sun set, turning everything gold and rose. In the distance, they could see the lights of their home, hear the faint sounds of their children laughing. Thomas would be helping with the evening feeding. Elizabeth would be finishing her homework. Michael would be reading in his favorite chair by the window. It was ordinary and perfect, this life they had made. That night, after the children were in bed and the ranch was quiet, Quincy and Rebecca sat on the porch they had expanded years ago, looking up at the stars. "You ever think about what your life would have been if things had gone differently?" Rebecca asked. "If you had not found me, if you had married someone else?" "Sometimes," Quincy admitted, "but I cannot imagine it would have been better than this. Cannot imagine loving anyone more than I love you." "Good answer," she said, leaning her head on his shoulder. "You have any regrets?" She was quiet for a long moment, thinking. "I regret that my family did not survive to see Nevada. I regret the suffering that brought me to you, but I do not regret a single moment of the life we have built. Not one, Quincy. Even the hard parts, even the losses, they all led us here. To this porch, to these stars, to the knowledge that we will wake up tomorrow and do it all again together." "How could I regret that?" "You could not," he agreed. "Neither could I." They sat in comfortable silence, hands clasped, watching the night deepen. Inside the house, their children slept safely. In the barn, the horses shifted and settled. The desert stretched away in all directions, vast and unforgiving and achingly beautiful. This was their kingdom, hard-won and well-loved, built on the foundation of one man's decision to stop for a fallen stranger in the burning sand. Years continued to pass with the steady inevitability of seasons. The children grew into young adults with their own dreams and ambitions. Thomas, true to his cowboy heritage, took over more and more of the ranch's daily operations, showing a natural talent for managing both animals and men. Elizabeth surprised everyone by developing a passion for medicine, apprenticing with the doctor who had established a practice in Rhyolite as the town stabilized into something more permanent than a boom town. Michael, the quiet observer, became a talented artist, his sketches and paintings capturing the stark beauty of the desert in ways that moved people to tears. "We did something right," Rebecca said one evening, watching their 3 adult children arguing good-naturedly over dinner about politics and philosophy and the changing world beyond Nevada. "Look at them, Quincy. They are good people." "They are," he agreed, his chest tight with pride. "We did do something right." Thomas married at 25, bringing home a spirited young woman named Catherine who had come west to teach school. Elizabeth married at 27, choosing a young doctor who shared her passion for healing. Michael, ever the individualist, declared he was married to his art and showed no signs of settling down, though Rebecca suspected that would change when the right person came along. Grandchildren arrived, a new generation of Yates children to fill the house with noise and joy. Quincy, who had never imagined himself as a grandfather, discovered he loved it fiercely. He taught them to ride, to track, to read the desert's moods. Rebecca taught them to cook and sew and to value education. Together, they passed on the stories of where the family had come from, the miracle of that day in the desert that had started everything. On their 30th anniversary, the entire extended family gathered at the ranch for a celebration. Children and grandchildren, ranch hands both past and present, friends from Rhyolite and the surrounding area, all came to honor the couple whose love story had become something of a local legend. Samuel, now gray-haired but still spry, gave a rambling toast about fate and persistence. Sarah, Marcus's widow since he had passed 2 years earlier, cried happy tears and hugged Rebecca for a long time. The children presented their parents with a painted family tree that Michael had created, showing the growth of the family from that one pivotal moment of rescue to the sprawling network of love that now existed. Quincy stood to speak, his hand clasped firmly in Rebecca's. "Most of you know the story of how Rebecca and I met. I found her collapsed in the desert, carried her 10 miles to this ranch, and somehow convinced her to marry me." Laughter rippled through the crowd. "What you might not know is that every single day since then, I have felt grateful beyond measure. Grateful that I was in the right place at the right time. Grateful that she survived. Grateful that she saw something worth loving in a rough cowboy with a small ranch and big dreams." He looked down at Rebecca, her gray hair shining in the lamplight, her hand warm in his. "You made me a better man. You gave me a family, a purpose, a reason to build something lasting. These 30 years have been the greatest gift of my life. I love you more today than I did on that first day, and I will love you more tomorrow than I do today. That is my promise to you, for whatever time we have left." Rebecca stood and kissed him to thunderous applause. "And I promise you the same," she said softly, just for him. "Always and forever, my cowboy. My home." The celebration lasted late into the night, the desert sky full of stars bearing witness to the love that had flourished in this harsh, beautiful place. And when everyone had finally gone to bed or departed for their own homes, Quincy and Rebecca sat alone on their porch one more time, as they had so many thousands of nights before. 30 years, Rebecca marveled. "It feels like both a lifetime and a moment." "Closer to forever than I ever expected to get," Quincy said. "And I would not change a single day. Not even the day Strand burned the barn, not even that. It led to us finally admitting how we felt, so no, not even that." She laughed and rested her head on his shoulder, fitting into the space that had been hers for 3 decades. "We should probably go to bed. Morning comes early. It always does." But neither of them moved, content to sit together in the darkness, listening to the desert night, feeling the steady rhythm of each other's breathing. They had built something extraordinary from tragedy and chance. A family, a legacy, a love that had weathered storms and grown stronger with each passing year. The ranch would continue after they were gone, passed down to Thomas and then to his children. The story would be told and retold, embellished and refined, becoming part of the family's mythology. But the heart of it would always remain true. A woman collapsed in the desert sun, and a cowboy carried her 10 miles to his ranch. And in that act of compassion, both of their lives were forever changed. Years later, when Quincy was 70 and Rebecca 68, they took one final ride out to the place where he had found her. The landscape had changed in some ways, markers of civilization spreading across what had once been empty wilderness. But the essential character remained the same: vast, unforgiving, beautiful. "Can you tell where it was exactly?" Rebecca asked, looking around. "Not precisely, but somewhere around here. Over 4 decades ago now. Hard to believe." She dismounted carefully, her movements stiffer than they once were but still graceful. Quincy followed, and they stood together looking out across the desert. "You ever think about what might have happened if you had not found me, if you had stayed on that deer trail?" "No," Quincy said honestly, "because that is not what happened. I did find you. I did carry you home, and every good thing in my life came from that choice. Thinking about alternatives feels like a waste of the time we have." "Wise man," Rebecca said with a smile. She took his hand and squeezed it. "Take me home, Quincy. I am ready." They rode back slowly, savoring the journey, the warmth of the sun, the clear desert air. When the ranch came into view, they saw the smoke from the chimneys, the horses in the corrals, the people moving about their daily work. Home, family, legacy. Everything they had built with determination and love. That night, surrounded by children and grandchildren, Quincy and Rebecca told the story one more time. The younger grandchildren listened with wide eyes, even though they had heard it dozens of times before. The older ones smiled and mouthed along with the familiar words. And when the story reached its end with Rebecca collapsing and Quincy finding her just in time, one of the youngest piped up with the question that always came. "And then what happened?" "And then," Rebecca said, pulling Quincy close, "we lived happily ever after." It was the truth, simple and complete. They had faced hardships, certainly. There had been droughts and floods, illness and loss, lean years and hard times. But through it all, they had each other. They had built a life of purpose and meaning. They had raised good children who became good adults. They had created something lasting in a place where everything seemed temporary. On a spring morning when Quincy was 73, he woke to find Rebecca still sleeping beside him, her breathing shallow but peaceful. He watched the sunrise paint the bedroom walls gold and thought about how blessed he had been. Every day with her had been a gift. Every year together had been a treasure. He had carried her 10 miles through the desert to save her life, never imagining that in doing so he was actually saving his own. She stirred and opened her eyes, finding him watching her. "Good morning," she murmured. "Good morning, my love." "How are you feeling?" "Happy," she said simply. "I am happy, Quincy. After everything, that is what it comes down to. I am happy." "Me too." He kissed her forehead gently. "Me too." They rose and dressed and went about their day, moving through the familiar routines that had structured their decades together. Breakfast with whatever family members were present. Morning coffee on the porch. Small tasks and large ones, the endless work of maintaining a ranch and a home. Lunch together, just the two of them, talking about nothing and everything. An afternoon rest. Evening with the family gathered around the dinner table, multiple generations sharing stories and laughter. And when night fell and they returned to their bed, they held each other close and whispered the same words they had said for more than 40 years. I love you. I will always love you. This was their happily ever after, not a fairy tale ending but something better and more real. A life fully lived, challenges met and overcome, love that deepened and matured with time. The cowboy who had carried a dying woman 10 miles through the desert had found his purpose and his partner. The woman who had collapsed under the merciless sun had found her home and her heart. Their story would be told for generations, passed down through the family they had created together. The ranch would continue, changing with the times but remaining rooted in the values they had established. And somewhere in the vast Nevada desert, in a place neither precisely marked nor forgotten, the earth remembered the spot where everything had begun, where death had been forestalled by compassion, where loneliness had been answered by love, where two lives had intersected and forever changed course. The desert had tried to take Rebecca that day, but Quincy had refused to let it. In saving her, he had saved himself. In building a life together, they had created something that transcended their individual stories. They had proved that even in the harshest circumstances, with the right person beside you, happiness was not just possible but inevitable. As the years wound down and their time together grew more precious, they never took a single day for granted. Every sunrise was a blessing. Every shared meal was a celebration. Every quiet moment together was a reminder of how far they had come from that desperate morning in the desert. And when the end finally came, as it must for everyone, they faced it together, hands clasped, surrounded by the family they had created and the love they had nurtured. Their last words to each other were simple. Thank you for everything, for this beautiful life. The ranch would continue. The children and grandchildren would carry on the legacy. The story would be retold countless times, inspiring and comforting future generations. But the essential truth would remain unchanged. Once upon a time, in the wild desert of Nevada in the year 1876, a cowboy named Quincy Yates found a woman named Rebecca Ramsey collapsed under the merciless sun. He carried her 10 miles to his ranch, not knowing that in saving her life, he was beginning his own greatest adventure. They fell in love. They built a life together. They created a family and a legacy that would endure long after they were gone. And they lived, truly and completely, happily ever after.